Hello everybody and welcome to Oomfs, your guide to everything fandom. Our Oomfs tweet is, why are all podcasts two best friends? I want a podcast that's two sworn enemies, just two bitches that absolutely hate each other.
Are you trying to tell us something with that Oomfs tweet, Jess?
I did not find this tweet.
I think this is on me for finding that tweet.
Are you trying to tell us something, B?
You're all my enemies. I want to duel you.
In this week's episode, we are going to discuss the Hallyu Wave, better known as the Korean Wave. We all interact with Korean products and media. So what we're going to do is, just as a little icebreaker, we're all going to go around the table and say what was the last Korean media or product that we interacted with or consumed. So we'll start with Jen.
Hello. The last thing technically that I consumed was on the K live show this morning with TXT, but my current ongoing drama is 25, 21 and 39. So I have been interacting with those recently. I would very much recommend 25, 21. 39, we'll see. We'll
just
see.
Looks really sad.
It looked like it was going to be like hopeful kind of sad, and then it's not seeming that way.
Oh dear.
Shame.
They said, we'll it's sad, hopeful, maybe.
Like life-affirming sad.
Yeah.
It kind of, it hasn't really panned out to be that way. There's too much drama.
Okay, Mimi, what was yours?
Yes, hello, yes, it's Mimi. Technically, the last Korean content that I consumed was the BTS V Live this morning, technically.
Yeah. I slept through that, unfortunately.
Having said that, I did go wandering around about town yesterday, and I went to Soka Lab and I picked up some Korean skincare because I love skincare, and I particularly love Korean skincare. I have too much of it, but that's another problem for another day.
You can never have too much.
I don't know. My 2 drawers full of skincare that are sitting there waiting to be used would disagree. I guess that's technically the last 2 pieces of Korean media or content that I consumed.
Hello, I'm B. I consume a lot of Korean media and content. I am currently wearing a BT21 t-shirt. It's got Shuki on it and it says no milk, which is very appropriate because I'm lactose intolerant. And I think the last content I interacted with was probably last night. I finished watching Descendants of the Sun, which I'm aware I'm 5 years too late on that one. I only watched it because it has Jinky from SHINee in it, and he's great in it. He's really good. His character has a really heartbreaking character arc, and he's just really adorable. And however, the actual drama itself is just terrible. It's really bad.
Sorry.
It's such a good start. It's such a good premise, and it's such a good setup, and the leads actually have really good chemistry, and then it just so rapidly goes downhill and the entire plot falls to bits.
Don't get me started on that writer. She just
I finished watching it out of this sense of obligation because it's on my Netflix homepage and it kept being on the continue watching pane, and I kept scrolling past it feeling really bad and being I should really finish watching that drama so I find out what happens. The answer is nothing much. Moving on, Jess, what have you been up to?
The latest thing that I consumed is I'm using an RJ pen right now. I have a Mang mouse, an RJ mouse mat, and my BTS glass for my juice. That is what I'm currently consuming. And I have an RJ notepad that I'm actually doodling in. Right, okay, so I think we've just demonstrated how pervasive Korean culture is at the moment, particularly with the 4 of us. So what we're going to talk about in the episode, we've already dedicated some time to K-pop and BTS. So we're going to branch out from that now and discuss other elements of K-culture that we enjoy. Before I do that though, I'm just going to very quickly give a bit of a history and a context of what Hallyu Wave is. Hallyu is actually a Chinese word which means Korean wave, and it's to basically describe the popularity of Korean culture, which has been around in Asia for quite some time, but obviously more recently has entered the Western market. There's been past instances where Korean media has become huge in the West and disappeared again. So, for example, there was a film in 2003 called Old Boy, which became a huge international hit. Unfortunately, Hollywood decided to remake it, and that was a disaster.
We don't talk about that.
We don't talk about Hollywood remakes.
But it did put Korea's cinema on the map, and Korea now does have quite a reputation in cinema for being kind of the experts at making revenge and crime thrillers. Like, they're just so good at it. Watch anything that's like revenge or crime thriller related in Korean cinema, and you'll have a good time. Then obviously,
or a traumatic time.
Well, yeah.
Just, I mean, in terms of the content warning.
Yeah, I would not
because they
say
don't shy away from it.
Yeah, watching Old Boy is not a good time.
Yeah, no, it's a good film, but just a lot of content warnings, guys.
Yeah. Don't watch it with your mum, which is what I do.
No.
Oh God.
Oh, Jess!
I know. Okay, and then obviously a few years after Old Boy came Gangnam Style, which, can you believe, is 10 years old this year? Like,
wow.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
How am I that old?
Gangnam Style just became like a huge global hit, and it sparked this huge craze. And unfortunately, it got reduced to being a bit of a meme song and a bit
And like,
Psy
it's
himself.
such a smart social commentary as well.
Yeah, it is. If anyone doesn't know, Gangnam is an area of Seoul which is known for being very rich, very prosperous, and it's where a lot of like the socialites hang out. And Psy was kind of commenting on that in the song, but obviously that got lost in translations. K-pop did obviously then enter like the Western hemisphere at that point, but I would say, putting that aside and like putting BTS's achievements aside, because obviously that's been a huge part of why the Hallyu Wave is where it is now. Another huge turning point was Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, which came out in 2019, and then in 2020 at the Oscars, it like swept up there. It like won Best Director, I think Best Screenplay, and obviously Best Film.
Yeah.
Which was a massive deal, and it really did then just open the doors to Korean film and TV just becoming a huge focus. Like Netflix themselves, they've invested over $460 million in creating Korean content just last year.
Wow.
Like,
let's be honest, like, Korean content is keeping Netflix's lights open.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's be.
If there weren't like Korean shows on there that I actually do want to watch, I would probably have cancelled my subscription.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
Pirate Bay is
basically
free.
all I watch on Netflix now.
Yeah. And like in the last couple of years alone, like during the pandemic, like the number of Korean series that are going on Netflix and films that are like Netflix originals as well, it's just absolutely skyrocketed.
There's so many big ones that in general K-dramas and like K-films on Netflix seem to be doing really well.
And the Hallyu Wave obviously isn't just limited to film, TV and music. It can include K-beauty and fashion. That's a huge industry. Esports, a lot of like good like gamers like Faker and his team, they're all like really well known in the esports community. Technology, Samsung, LG, Hyundai. Food and drink, webtoons, you know, these are all things that come from Korea and they're just so pervasive now. And even Korean language classes are on the rise. Korean culture is everywhere.
Like even like I think with like YouTubers and stuff as well, like, you know, they do the mukbangs, right? Like how they say it, right? That's Korean, isn't it? Like half of them are using this term and they don't even know what it is.
Yeah. And that's been a trend on YouTube for like
a while.
Really before K culture got really big in the West. Like I remember British and American YouTubers that I follow doing that as like content. Yeah.
But what's important to note with the Hallyu Wave and its rise recently is that it's not necessarily an accident. Like the South Korean government does invest heavily in it. They do financially support a lot of the media that gets put out there and a lot of the exports as well. And it's a part of Korea's way of using their technology and their talents and resources as a soft power to help boost their economy, their tourism and their export market. With all that said, we're just going to kind of have a bit of a chat about some kind of key Korean films, TV shows, other things that we kind of have enjoyed over the years. So where do you want to start, guys?
I hope people are ready for some spicy K-drama opinions.
Oh yeah. As you know, I have many opinions about everything.
What? No.
We should go with films because that's like a nice place to start. It's a good jump.
I genuinely think Snowpiercer might be a good one to bring up.
I agree. Yeah.
And it had that.
And also Snowpiercer was done dirty. That's all I'm gonna say.
Big time.
It was done
oh my god, it was
dirty.
Also, I also remember pirating it because it was impossible to find anywhere to watch. This was during the rise of streaming services. And I remember pirating it because I'm a big Chris Evans fan. And I was just like, oh, watch his film, watch him doing a serious film instead of his superhero stuff. And just being like bowled over by how good it was and being like, why is this not getting the attention that it deserves? This is incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
I think Snowpiercer is an instance though where you can see where K-media or Korean content was sort of subdued, I guess, by the Western media, because that's really what happened to it. It was a really good movie, very good social commentary, and of course it was Bong Joon-ho as well, so you know he doesn't shy away from the social commentary. But obviously, because it was technically a Hollywood movie, it fell into all the trappings of a Hollywood movie.
A certain Hollywood pervert who did not like it.
Yeah, basically.
I won't say his name. He looks like a walrus. So,
Which is an insult to walruses.
It is.
Walruses. But it was famously like, even at the time, I remember people that I followed on Tumblr talking about it and being like, this is a sleeper hit, this is so good. But it's clearly being really poorly marketed by the studio. It suffered cuts, it suffered production delays. I remember they filmed it and it took way longer than it should have done, years and years, to actually have a cinematic release.
But it's interesting now, after the success of Parasite and whatnot, that it has its own Netflix series. And now everybody loves it.
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen it. I don't think I will. I mean, in general, Bong Joon-ho has a big focus on really shoving societal inequalities into your face so that you cannot ignore them, like being like, look, this is class structure, this is inequality, this is poverty, this is all of the bigotry that you see in the world. I'm going to put it on screen and it's going to be raw and unpolished and horrible, but also compelling to watch, which is something that Hollywood hates.
Yes, they do. Until Parasite came along, and then suddenly it was accepted.
But then I think that also warrants a wider discussion from us. I think one of the problems that I see with people consuming lots of Korean media that has strong messages like Parasite is that people are not seeing the message. Like, obviously some people do, but others just seem to choose to ignore it, which you do you, I guess. If you want to consume it that way, then, sure. But I think it kind of makes the material less impactful.
Yeah, it does. But another Korean film that was a success internationally and was also set on a train and also discusses social commentary was Train to Busan.
I love that film so much.
Which is such a good film. It's beyond
such a good film.
Actually never seen it.
Have you
I have
not?
Have you not?
I am not a consumer of horror content. I don't enjoy it.
Jen.
But that film manages to both scare the absolute out of you, but also break your heart.
Yes.
I've never felt so conflicted because I was terrified, but also deeply emotionally traumatized.
Yes. Yeah. And
I have to watch it now, don't I?
You absolutely have to watch it.
It's really good.
It is excellent. So good. It really is.
It's a great story, just really well told, and it is beyond just a zombie film, because people likened it to World War Z, which does it a disservice.
No.
That is like comparing soul music to flipping a TikToker. I don't. God.
And obviously, of course, Hollywood planned to remake Train to Busan.
I do not understand. I mean, I do understand, but I find it tragic, the urge for Hollywood to remake everything if it is not in English.
If something is good, why do you want to remake it worse? It is pretty much always worse. There are extremely few examples where the remake is better.
Like, what's it going to be? Train to Philadelphia? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like,
America doesn't even have a train system that runs well or properly.
No.
Like, Amtrak is mostly used for freight. Where are you going to set it?
It would be better if they set it on a plane instead.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I wanted to say was, about like Korean movies in comparison to like Hollywood movies or Western movies is, I think the reason why Korean movies do so well or work so well is because they focus on character development. So the plot is there and everything, but the focal point of Korean movies I've found, or the ones at least that I've enjoyed, are it takes you on a character arc. So you see the plot going from point A to point B, but your main focus is on the character. So you're looking at how that that character gets from point A to point B. Whereas with Hollywood movies or Western movies, they are very plot focused. They only focus on the plot. So they're showing you the plot as in, this is how we're going to get from point A to point B, but there's no focus on the character. And I think this is what works in favor of Korean movies, is that they understand people.
Definitely,
I saw comments about Parasite, which is a brilliant movie and incredibly well acted and deserved absolutely all of the Oscars of all time. Like, I think it should win an Oscar this year as well, just to show people that it deserves more Oscars. I remember some white man film critic saying something casual on like a podcast or something about how different the Korean acting style is, and him getting rightfully dragged on Twitter with people being like, yeah, in Korean films and dramas, they actually act. Like, the actors do their job. They act as the characters that they're supposed to be. In so many particularly US American films, they really wouldn't. Everything is so plot heavy, and
it's either they're wooden or they're on the completely other scale and it's over the top.
Hollywood films and Hollywood acting is just more style over substance, whereas Korean films, like, the substance is at the core of what they're doing in their storytelling and their acting. And the character
One film that I really, really loved, which I still love, is The Handmaiden, which is...
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's
weird.
It's actually based on a book called Fingersmith, but it's brilliant. I can't explain the plot because you kind of have to watch it to understand what's going on, but it's very unreliable narrator. It's very, like, it's a kind of a psychosexual thriller, and it's really dark but really fascinating, and it has what I consider to be really good queer representation. Several of the main characters are lesbians or various different sexualities, and that's kind of just accepted in the plot, I suppose. It's relevant to the plot, but it's never a plot device where it's like, oh, we are lesbians and we cannot be together because we are lesbians. It's so sad. Or our entire life story is about how difficult it is to be a lesbian. It's just kind of a side element of the plot that some of these characters happen to be queer. It's a brilliant movie, and it's also beautifully filmed. Like, the cinematography, I was going to say, particularly in some of these other films we've talked about, the cinematography is just stunning.
I'm going to plug a way more wholesome K movie that is just a kind of frothy slice of life. It's called Sunny. It's from 2011. It's basically just about this group of women, and they were like they had this really strong friendship when they were teenagers, and then it kind of looks at like their lives when they're older. They've all kind of drifted apart a little bit. One of them gets terminally ill. This sounds like an upper, but it is, I swear. It's like heartwarming, kind of sad, and they come back together. So it kind of looks at like how deeply teen female relationships run, and how those bonds can last, and how sometimes they don't, and how life works out. It's another example of what I think Korean media is often very good at, which is kind of slice of life, those kinds of stories, which I don't think we do that well in the West.
I really enjoy those, like, sort of slice of life where it's not so much that there isn't a plot, it's that the plot kind of happens almost in the background, and like there is a story arc, things do happen, but it's very much, you know, you're just kind of following these people on their daily lives. There was this is moving slightly away from films now, there was a drama I watched recently called Move to Heaven.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much.
Beautiful. It's so sweet and so sad, and it's also what I really enjoyed about it is, as a neurodivergent person, there's not a whole lot of representation of neurodivergent people in media in general, and in Korean media not a whole lot. But Move to Heaven, the main character is this young man who they don't really specify in the show. They use the outdated term Asperger's, which, you know, we don't use anymore, but basically he's somewhere on the autism spectrum, and his neurodivergence is just so sensitively handled by everyone in the show. Like, it's just seen as this extra thing about him. Like, when he gets upset, he likes to name different types of fish, and he goes to the aquarium to watch all the fish, and so if he ever runs off, they know to find him there. And all of the characters are just so loving and accepting of that about him, and they're like, oh, okay, this is just another thing about him. And he's also brilliant at his job, which is working as a trauma cleaner. And it's just a nice show. And like, there are things that happen in it. There is an overarching plot, but you just learn a lot about him as a character and about his family and his friends, and a lot of their really quite deep sort of emotional goings on and the ways that they see the world.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning Park Chan-wook as a filmmaker, because as we said in the intro, he did make Old Boy, which was one of the first internationally huge Korean films. And he then made the Vengeance trilogy, which was Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Lady Vengeance. And I've seen 2 of them. I haven't seen the Mr. Vengeance one, but they are brilliant. Definitely recommend those.
Lady Vengeance is just so good.
It's just so innovative, like the way he films things, like the techniques that he uses, they're just so good. And cinematography of the Handmaiden and the plot and the storytelling of it, and that he doesn't shy away from controversial matters, just because in Korea, their film and TV, they do touch on subjects which in some ways can be treated better than the West treats them.
I like that if you've been watching K-dramas for a while, you do tend to be able to recognize the tropes in them, but at the same time, they also do a really good job of defying those tropes and doing the unexpected, particularly with some of the films that are, you know, very much like revenge thriller kind of things. These really unexpected things happen that would absolutely never get done if it was a Hollywood movie, for example, because Hollywood movies are very formulaic and sanitized in a lot of ways, and there's topics that they don't want to cover, and they have this very black and white morality to them, whereas in a lot of Korean movies I've watched, that is it's all about grey morality. It's all about making the best out of several terrible choices. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
I think also the thing that makes Korean dramas something that is more interesting than Western dramas is, although those tropes can be the same from drama to drama, is the way that most directors or writers or whatever will have their own twist on that trope. So it makes it almost more interesting than watching Western dramas, because although you're able to sit in something that is comfortable because it's a familiar, easy trope that you understand and you've watched before, the story will be vastly different. Like, my favorite K-drama director is Won-ho Shin, and Shin, essentially all of his dramas are the same premise. They're just long form slice of life stories that focus on a set of characters in a certain scenario. But because all of those dramas are so different, that makes them so interesting to watch, and why I will always go back to his dramas. Whatever he does, I will probably watch it and enjoy it.
Well, before we go too much onto K-dramas, what we're going to do is we're each going to give our 3 films or dramas that we would recommend people watch. They don't have to be our favourites, but obviously we have to like them if we want to recommend them. So, Mimi?
I think I picked, basically, we've mentioned most of these so far anyway. I picked 2 movies and a drama series. So obviously Old Boy we mentioned. I think Old Boy was actually one of the first Korean movies that I'd ever seen ever. So I would highly recommend it. Other than, you know, like I said, content warning for the plot. The cinematography is just amazing. And to think it was a movie that was released like a while ago as well. The cinematography still holds up to this day. Like, I haven't seen anything like it since. The second one is, obviously we mentioned this as well, is Train to Busan. I think in terms of storytelling and just telling a story about people and humanity, Train to Busan does it really well. And then the third thing that I was going to recommend was a TV series, the Reply series. Absolutely love those.
That is a Won-ho Shin drama, and I would say Reply 94 is probably my favorite drama of all time, hands down.
But yeah, so those are my 3.
B?
I say, well, I'm going to go with mostly films. One of the ones I'd highly recommend is The Handmaiden. It is brilliant. It's a fantastic film. It's a beautiful piece of filmmaking. It's just so good in so many ways. And yeah, like I said, it's got brilliant queer representation in it and really subverts expectations of how the plot of a film should go. You're watching it, and then there's moments in it where you think the film has ended, and it has not. There is much more to come. The other one, I would say I recommend Snowpiercer. It's a really good introduction to Bong Joon-ho's directing work. It's accessible if you have never seen a Korean movie before, if you don't know much about K-culture. It's kind of like a nice stepping stone to that, because you get an idea of his directing style and, you know, the way that he constructs films. It's brilliantly acted. It has an all-star cast. It's like Chris Evans, Tilda Swinton, so many famous actors whose names I forget. And it's mostly in English. There are parts that are in Korean.
It's also depressing, but not in the "this is going to ruin my entire day" way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'm going to recommend a TV show, Kingdom. Kingdom is brilliant. It has 2 seasons and a movie, and I think there's probably a 3rd season coming. They've just delayed with COVID. It's just so good. I have never really been able to get into historical dramas that much, but this one is just so brilliantly done. It's historical drama, big emphasis on the politics, but also zombies. And they find ways to keep it so it doesn't follow the expected tropes of the zombie movie or the zombie TV show. It really has twists and turns. You discover things about the zombies that are increasingly terrifying. And I really enjoyed it. And it's brilliantly acted. The cast are just fantastic. And the movie Kingdom Ashen of the North has some really kick-ass female lead characters. They're just brilliant. I love them.
Jen?
Yeah, okay, so I went with TV series because that's what I consume the most of, to be honest. These are not necessarily my very, very favourites. I do love them a lot, but they're ones that I think are good, dive in, easy to watch, and good examples of what I feel like Korean media does best, which is good characters with strong stories. Actually, one of them is just pure fluff, but the other two. So I picked another Shin PD drama, Prison Playbook. If you've watched Squid Game, it's got Park Hae-soo. It also has one of my favorite Korean actors, Jung Kyung-ho. I've butchered that, I'm sorry. It's just brilliant. It basically is about this baseball player, and TLDR, he beats up this guy who was not nice to his sister, and they put him in prison. And it just follows his time in prison. My second one is a recent one, last year, Mad for Each Other. I ranted and raved about this because I thought it was beautiful. And it's basically about these two people who both have mental health issues. And mental health in K-drama is often not portrayed that well, but this is a really good example. They basically grow to care for one another, and it's about how their relationship forms. And it has excellent side characters, one of whom, I'm going to be careful about what term I use because they're not detailed as trans. They are kind of a cross-dresser, drag kind of figure. It's never really explained, but they use he pronouns for them, so I will. He's just an excellent character, and he's a side character, but he's never once a joke. It's just excellent. Watch it. You'll love it. It's not very long. It's on Netflix. And my last choice is a complete fluff, nonsense, silly drama, but it's so warm and so delightful. Shopping King Louis. It is a typical early-ish, because I think it's like 2014, 2015 K-drama, in that it's a load of fluff and nonsense. Basically, this heir to some money, he, for whatever reason, I can't remember, there's a hit out on him, and then he gets knocked out, and then he loses his memory and he doesn't know that he's rich, and he ends up falling in love with this girl. And honestly, it sounds stupid, but it's so lovely, and it's so warm, and it's so delightful. Yeah, those are my choices. I've rambled a bit, sorry.
That's all right.
What about you, Jess?
Yeah, well, because I've gone last, I've had to rewrite my list like 3 times to try and not pick the same ones as you guys.
I was aware of that when I was mentioning Kingdom. I was like, I bet Kingdom's one of Jess's choices, because you're the one that introduced me to it.
Scribble that one out.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, don't worry. Okay, so I have picked 2 films and a drama, which are pretty obvious ones, I'm afraid, but never mind. The first one is Parasite, because if you haven't seen it, you absolutely must see it. If you have any interest whatsoever in Korean cinema. Yeah, it's such a well-crafted film. Like, just go on YouTube and look at detailed analysis of why it is just so perfectly structured, and certain scenes are just like basically works of art. The house was built specifically for the film, so it was designed exactly how Bong Joon-ho wanted it to be for his screenplay. So the way that the whole film is put together is fantastic, and just a great example of filmmaking. So definitely watch that if you haven't already. It does live up to its hype. The second film is The Wailing, which is a horror film. Not my favorite genre, but it is really, really well well done. It's one of those where it starts almost as a bit of a comedy in the fact that it's just a bit of a bumbling policeman in this small village falling over and, just being really incompetent. And it does actually give you some really good belly laughs, but then that soon switches and it just becomes this terrifying film of some like mysterious disease sweeping through this village that's basically possessing people. And there might be some kind of like demon spirit living in the village that's kind of turning people. And the policeman's young daughter becomes a victim of that. She suddenly starts to turn. So they bring in a shaman to try and perform an exorcism on her. So yeah, it's an intense film, but it is really, really good, really well told. And like with a lot of Korean films or non-Hollywood films, it's one of those where you really don't know what the outcome's going to be. Like there's no guarantee it's going to be a nice, fluffy, happy ending with everything tied up at the end. It's quite a long film. It's like 2.5 hours long, but you don't notice the time. I didn't anyway. It just flew by. And my final one is a drama, and it's one that pretty much everyone in the world except Jen has seen. And it's Squid Game.
Listen, I have reasons.
I know. It's fine, don't worry.
You don't have to watch it.
It is brilliant, and it does live up to its hype and why it became so popular. It was not overrated or overblown at all. Like whether people fully understood the message it was conveying when they watched it, or they were just enjoying like the gore and the misery, I don't know. But
I don't know. Having said that, the way a lot of people in the Western industry are interacting with Squid Games, they've completely missed the point.
Once again, it's a show that really focuses in on the societal inequality. The main character is a man who lost his job because he was involved in trade unions and was subject to police brutality, and like that just seems to be completely glossed over.
I think it's worth noting that Korea has a very turbulent history in terms of financial crashes and wars and stuff like that. Squid Game is not for me anyway. It's not a drama I would have watched. I don't enjoy that kind of human torture element. It's not my thing. But watching what America has done, and it is America, I'm sorry, is just like horrid Squid Game t-shirts made in a sweatshop in India. Literally, this is what that drama is trying to comment on.
Celebrities having Squid Game themed Halloween parties.
Yeah, I just, Kim Kardashian dressed as the doll from Squid Game.
So did Lizzo.
The irony is lost on you.
It's the fact that when something reaches that popularity, it becomes mainstream. When this K-culture breaks through into the mainstream, it then becomes victim to this, the memification, the people who consume the content simply as content to consume without a thought to what the content is and what it means, and without any kind of, just no thoughts, head empty.
And that's what we were saying earlier about Gangnam Style. Like that was not a meme song, that wasn't released as a gimmick. Like that was Psy making a point about social status in Korea, but the West took it and ran with it as this meme dance craze and completely lost its meaning.
And people were basically just considering it to be this crazy fun meme song.
Yeah,
exactly. I would also like to note that it isn't just serious dramas like Squid Game that you see that kind of social commentary. It is in a lot of Korean storytelling, even in very light, fluffy dramas. You will see that kind of thing. Like Mimi mentioned, the Reply series, peppered throughout that entire series is little important bits of Korean history, and they are very traumatic, scary things. Especially like Reply 1988 is completely pinned on what was going on in Korea around that time and how that affects family relationships. I don't know, as you can tell by the excitement in my voice, I find that very interesting to see.
Well, it's interesting that there's a lot of those issues that are highlighted in Korean media, and they are like unique situations to Korea, but at the same time they are also global issues that we can all still relate to. Like no one is immune to social inequality and whatnot. So even though they are talking about specific moments in Korean history or like issues within Korean society, they are definitely transferable across borders.
The other thing that makes K-dramas and K-movies work is that the production values are so high.
I mean, really are.
They put a lot of
Yes.
money into a 16 or however many episode series. So they look lush. The casts are beautiful. Some K-dramas are just straight up Korea porn. Like they make Korea look beautiful.
Mhm.
And that is very much something that I think is characteristic of Korean sort of filmmaking, and also the fact that it's, you know, it's a lot of it is backed by the government, so they have the budget available to do this.
And it does push the tourism agenda as well.
It does really push the tourism agenda, yeah.
I'm going to quickly do our sponsor. Our sponsor for today is Bong Joon-ho calling Quentin Tarantino Quentin Hyungnim when he won the Best Director Oscar. And for those of you who
flex.
I know. If you're not familiar with Korean honorifics, Hyung is used by males to refer to older males, and you would only use that in the event that you were close to that person, and it's showing respect for the age difference that you have between you. And Nim is also an honorific, which is used in a similar way to like Mr. or Madam, but it's generally used if you're a professional equal to somebody. So the fact that Bong Joon-ho said that to an American director on an American awards stage, it was just a huge serve, and we love Bong Joon-ho.
What a flex. He's
great. We stand for all
He is a hero.
He is, absolutely.
I did make a Bong Joon-ho photo card, which is in my album somewhere.
Excellent. We love him. Yes, so thank you, Bong Joon-ho, for being our sponsor for today.
What a lad.
He's great.
But yeah, on the subject of K-dramas, I've ranted a lot about ones that I liked, but there's a couple that I didn't love, but are seen as iconic.
I've got more than a couple. There is one Korean female writer who is responsible for a lot of dramas that were absolutely ridiculously huge in Korea, like massive, and that is Kim Yoon-suk. Name a drama that was huge in Korea in the last like 10 years and she probably had a hand in it. 2020's King Eternal Monarch is hers. Mr. Sunshine, Goblin, Descendants of the Sun, Secret Garden, The Heirs. She's written a lot of stuff, but she is our controversial figure today because I don't really like her that much. That writer is so divisive in K-drama circles because some people go so hard for her dramas, even when they suck. And then others like me are like, yeah, no, this is bad.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
You know what? She's the same writer who wrote Goblin, right? And I did not enjoy that. I'm sorry.
Nor did I.
I did not get into Goblin.
Ooh.
I watched one episode, not for me.
We're gonna get cancelled.
I'm gonna say, guys.
There is a whole like section of the K-drama community that will actually kill us for having that opinion. Goblin,
so we're gonna edit that out.
We can edit it out. It's fine.
No, we shouldn't.
We should keep it in.
Goblin is so highly regarded, and I thought it was the stinkiest fart of a show. Honestly,
my main issue was the fact that he met her when she was a school kid. That creeps me out.
This is what that writer does. She gets these amazing casts and you're like, wow, this should just work. This writing could be absolute poop and it should still work because the cast is amazing, but no. And also she does that Stephanie Meyer Twilight thing where the side pairings are so much more interesting than the flat ass main pairing. No chemistry in that Goblin main pairing. I hate it. Hate it.
I've clearly pushed some buttons for Jen.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is
I feel like some of these dramas we've talked about have been like they're kind of bubbling under the surface of the Korean wave, in the sense that to have watched some of these, you kind of already need to be quite into K culture and quite into K dramas. Particularly, like Itaewon Class is a perfect example of that, where it's like it got quite big, or like people who wouldn't otherwise have watched K dramas watched that K drama. Related to that is, I suppose, variety content.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting some variety shows because, they're very popular. More so, I would say, in Asia than in the West.
The Korean variety is on a different level. Like, it's so well produced. It's very funny. A lot of effort goes into it.
It can be stupid, but it's also very smart. It doesn't like capitalize on like, oh, that person's stupid. Ha ha, let's all laugh at them, which a lot of Western sort of light entertainment focuses on. Like, there's a lot of very, very clever and well-crafted variety shows in terms of the things that they make people do.
The games are great. And they're so kind of, I suppose, welcoming of the guests that they always have on the show. Like, never do you go, oh, this is clearly a show that is kind of a place for the comedian hosts to do their comedy thing and the guests to kind of sit there and sometimes interject, which is what happens on a lot of shows in the West. Whereas something like Knowing Bros, it's really a place for all of the guests to shine and to make up their own games and to be funny and show off their interesting talents. And I really enjoy it.
Also, again, a lot of them are set up to be very good advertisements for Korea. Like Amazing Saturday, the whole premise is that they can win delectable pieces of food from different parts of Korea. Like, it makes you hungry watching it.
Amazing Saturday is great. Oh, I was going to say, a lot of the like more reality-based variety shows, they have really interesting formats. So like I Live Alone is fascinating. And then similarly, you've got something like Return of Superman, which
I love Return.
I just, it's so adorable. It's really, really cute. And it's really just wholesome content. It's just these fathers who are varying degrees of involved in their children's lives have to completely take care of their children while their partner is not there. And isn't it, bumbling fathers? And actually 90% of the time, the fathers are actually great. They're great parents, and they don't bumble about much. They seem to be doing a great job of raising their kids, and it's just very wholesome and cute.
It's really nice. And I want to give a shout out to Infinite Challenge, because that is just
it's so good.
Peak Korean variety. It
really
good.
Is.
It's such a shame that it finished, but that is a brilliant show. Better than Running Man. I've said it.
I think having said that, I think the two variety shows, they offer different things. So like what I used to watch Infinite Challenge for, I didn't watch Running Man for that. Like I think they just both have different things to offer.
And linking it all back to Psy and Gangnam Style, a lot of the Infinite Challenge cast were in his MVs in Gangnam Style, and then Gentleman, his follow-up single.
I was going to say, it's also interesting, Netflix have started picking up variety shows now as well. You can watch Busted on there, which I recommend. It's very funny and it's a good watch. You can also watch, although they call it Men on a Mission, but it isn't Men on a Mission. It's
Knowing Bros.
They for some reason changed the name, but you can watch those on Netflix now.
Yeah, it's great.
And I think they're quite popular in the rest of Asia as well, because they also will have guests who are not necessarily Korean celebrities. Like there's a whole genre of variety shows where they have non-Koreans living in Korea or visiting Korea who come on the shows, and hijinks ensue, which is always entertaining.
Hospital Playlist has a thing where the cast went camping, and they did a couple of series of that.
That's cute.
Infinite Challenge famously had Jack Black on their show when he was in Korea to promote. And a few of those clips from that show went viral. But
it is interesting how lots of Western celebrities have specifically said how much they enjoy promoting in Korea. Like they come and do like the press tours. And I think also I remember there was a musician, I think it was Troye Sivan, had a concert in Seoul, and I remember he said even recently he's been like, that's one of my favorite concerts ever because the fans were just so enthusiastic. It's interesting how that also influences the way that K-culture is perceived in the West.
Also, Korea has this thing with these, like, they're not very long. They're usually sort of like 10 to 13 episodes. They're like little kind of reality type shows where they'll put big stars in K-drama or idols or whatever into a situation, and then they film it for those few episodes. And they are often the most soothing, delightful things you can watch. Like I mentioned Yoon Suk earlier. He's in one from 2019 called Coffee Friends. It is the coziest brain bath. Basically just him and some other actors and actresses run a coffee shop on Jeju Island. It is so soft and soothing and gorgeous, and I can't recommend it highly enough. There's others like that as well. If you look on my drama list, there's hundreds.
There's like a kind of a concept of healing.
Yeah, it's kind of just like making escapist content, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just like there was a show that, again, Jinky from SHINee was on a show where they just sat in a little cafe next to the ocean and sang songs.
Yeah, it was
nice.
Lovely.
It's just lovely.
Master in the House is a good example of that as well.
And I think one thing to mention in variety, like this whole show is dedicated to it, and it also features heavily in a lot of variety and also like dramas and films, is food, Korean food.
Korean food is
which
really
has become
big.
huge internationally. Like even my little town now has a Korean cafe.
I was going to say, a restaurant opened in my parents' town recently, and my dad said, "There's a Korean restaurant in our town now," and I was like, "The food's great."
Yeah, and it's quite easily accessible in supermarkets here in the UK as well. Like
you can get
like
kimchi
Korean
and
ramen,
gochujang and stuff now.
Yeah.
Even before BTS and all of the other K-culture stuff really blew up, the skincare community, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, has really been just obsessed with Korean skincare. There was a phase when the 10-step routine.
The 10-step. But the thing is, the 10-step routine, it's not even Korean. That was American made.
Yeah.
Korean skincare itself doesn't adhere to 10 steps or says you have to follow 10 steps or anything. That was American made. Sorry, I say this because I'm really into Korean skincare. I got into Korean skincare before I got into K-pop. I feel like it's more prolific now, but even like it's much more mainstream now.
Like you didn't used to be able to buy it. You can buy it in shops now.
Yeah.
It used to be the main skincare you could find in shops, in supermarkets and Boots and stuff, was like your basic mud mask, maybe some moisturizers, a toner if you were lucky. And now it is absolutely everywhere. And that's kind of been on the rise, particularly during the old Panny D, because the general beauty industry has shifted away from makeup and more towards skincare because that makes them more money. The idea of there being these like more sort of advanced skincare. I have a background in science, and so I'm really interested in the fact that there's so much sort of research going on in skincare in various parts of Asia, and that's now being paid attention to in the West, and it's part of the whole Korean wave.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can easily find Korean skincare in like Boots, Superdrug, like UK pharmacy chains, and it's also used as a selling point as well. Like, look at this, it's Korean, therefore it must be good.
Like it's the holy grail of skincare is skincare from Korea.
Exactly. Yeah. It's definitely used as a marketing tool. Okay, so before we finish the episode, we're going to just talk a little bit about the future of the Hallyu Wave. If you follow current affairs, Korean current affairs, you may have seen that there was an election recently with a new president elected who belongs to a party that has previously blacklisted the likes of Bong Joon-ho for being, quotes, too liberal, which is when he then went to the US amid Snowpiercer and Okja. Like, what do we think is the future for the Hallyu Wave? Do we think the government is still going to invest in it? Are they going to censor any of it? Or is it just too big now?
I personally think at this point it is making them so much money that will override all things. I mean, from a K-drama perspective, we are starting to see more liberal elements. I mentioned Mad for Each Other and their cross-dressing character. I wonder whether that might be toned down a little bit. We might take a few steps backwards in terms of that stuff. Honestly, I think money talks, and they're making a lot of money out of selling that industry to the West.
Yeah. And I think also it's too big now necessarily to be censored. Like, if this had happened a few years ago, I can see it going very differently, but because it's happening now, when the West has already got this idea of what K-culture is, and the Korean wave has already hit essentially, and it's now so big that if things began to be more obviously censored, or perhaps considerably different to what people were expecting, if we don't see any more films like Parasite, if we see directors like Bong Joon-ho, who is very outspoken about these issues and very outspoken about his criticism of the government, if they're silenced, that will be national news in the Western world as well as in Korea. The people making this media know that overseas audiences have expectations about diversity and representation, and if all of that suddenly disappears, I don't know if their popularity will take a hit.
Yeah, on the flip side, it could potentially make creators, like writers, directors, even bolder in their commentary.
I was thinking of one particular drama that I watched recently called DP, which I highly recommend. It is grim and harrowing, and it's
right up my street.
You'll love it, Jess. It's about a military police officer who enlists for his mandatory enlistment period and becomes a military police officer, and he becomes a specialist military police officer whose job it is to track down and return enlisted soldiers who have deserted their posts. basically. According to Korean viewers, certainly it is the most accurate portrayal of what enlistment is like for the average Korean man. It's horrible. The whole show is about the bullying that occurs in the military, basically, and it's very true to life, and it touches on some really difficult topics. Read the trigger warnings if you're planning on watching it. But a show like that is very close to criticizing the system of enlistment and, in general, the whole idea of following along with authority. And I personally think that most people working in the Korean entertainment industry have similarly progressive views and will not want to be shut up.
I think it's just hard to predict what will sort of happen. It's one of those ones where sometimes when you think it's going to go one way and then it goes another way and you're just like...
We have to be conscious of the fact that we're a bunch of Westerners. So at the end of the day, it doesn't affect us in the same sort of way.
No. I guess what we can take away is that we will continue to support these creators. And yeah, I think that the wave is too big to be stopped.
I think so much of the Korean wave has been absorbed into popular culture that it's difficult to untangle that now. Like, it is simply, there will be K-dramas that are as big as Squid Game. That's just going to keep happening now. And similarly with K-pop, there will be other artists that get really, really big and get really popular, and they're kind of solidifying their place in the pop culture market now. And it's no longer a thing where it's like, oh, this is a niche form of entertainment that's difficult to find. It's now like, well, if you want to watch and see this content, it's there. It's actively being promoted in the West. So yeah.
So yeah, we've discussed a lot there, and Jen is going to give us a little bit of a takeaway of the episode.
I think, as you can tell, we have got many varied opinions on Korean media, but I think the biggest takeaway is how much we all enjoy it, be that movies or skincare or dramas or food, whatever it is. We all have a very deep love for Korean culture and Korean media in particular. I hope my ranting has not been too intense. And also, I think we have highlighted the fact that maybe we need to do a K-drama episode.
We really do.
Okay. Thank you. Mimi is now going to plug our socials.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you have thoughts and opinions, if you agreed or disagreed with us, you can tweet us at oomfs. Feel free to contact us. I don't know, DM us, at us. Let us know what you thought of the episode. We have a YouTube channel, so if you could like and subscribe, that would help us out greatly. We also upload our episodes on SoundCloud, so you can go have a listen there as well if you want.
Yeah, and I will be hosting the next episode, which is going to be an introduction to fan fiction. I think that's going to be a bit of a wild ride, so I'm excited to record that. Might need to pre-read some fanfic to remind us of the kind of things we're talking about. Yeah, but over to Jess.
Okay, yes. So that was our Hallyu Wave episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some good recommendations from it as well. We recommend just watching everything that we've suggested, maybe not
Goblin.
Not Goblin.
No. Some people absolutely love that drama. Make your own decision.
And yes, that was it for today. So thank you to my lovely co-hosts, and we will see you in the next episode.